So essentially, this is the Ethereum agenda meeting. It's agenda meeting 36. These were the items that they were covering. Essentially, they were covering some technical details when it comes to machine verifiable and human reading data. They were talking about pre-compiled contracts or signature verification. A lot of stuff people don't really, I don't want to say necessarily care about, but people that are technically looking at it, developers, people that are writing code for Ethereum smart contracts are going to be very caring about this. I'm going to keep this in contextual standpoint to the mining community and the people that buy hardware and support the network as a whole from a proof of work standpoint, which is really that number 4 item, which is the EIP 958. And this was being facilitated by an individual named Piper. And he was coming from just a facilitator standpoint, had real no egg in the fight or any kind of dog in the fight, was just saying, hey, I'm being the community spokesperson for this, because there's only a handful of people that are in these Ethereum dev meetings that are contributors, and was facilitating it. So essentially, it started off with a good, I think, representation from Piper on what the sentiment right now is from the community on the mining situation with the ASICs coming out, with at least Bitmain's first discussion of the E3. No discussion, I mean, nobody knows yet if the F3 really exists or if somebody was spoofing the internet with some BS. But the discussion right now, at least from Vitalik's standpoint, is it's not a huge threat to the network because he's just doing some simple math of figuring out a $2,500 mining rig, which you can't really buy a $2,500 mining rig that does 180 mega hash. You can probably spend about $3,200, so we're about $700 gap right now on his math. But you know, a $3,200 mining machine that's 180 mega hash that can get down to about 900 watts and 850 with some good modifications in an ideal situation. This isn't probably going to be for most people. Most people are going to be about 950 to 1,000 watts in that scenario with 180 mega hash. But the price point of being $800 is the real catalyst, right? So from a threat to the network standpoint, it's being viewed very linear, in my opinion, on that, because it's being considered that it's not a huge threat. But anybody that understands the way these taping out of events, the R&D side of it's very expensive up front, but they can tape things out in about 5 months, get it out to production. And then it's about a production line. It's the whole point of having a very good production system that can pop out content very quickly. So they could put out and I don't know their absolute foundry abilities, but if you look at most things that come from Shenzhen in China, once it has that kind of blueprint out there and they have all the tooling and everything that they need, they can usually tape out stuff pretty quick to where it's like 5,000 plus units a month, right? So if they have the ability to scale it at that price point and they have a huge demand for it, then it's an existential threat to the network when it comes to centralization of one company having hooks into the network. And I think that's the message that wasn't conveyed. And it is, again, it's a variable, it's a possibility. We don't know what the forced projection of Bitmain would be on it. Can they flood the network? Can they try to, because once you do all that revenue, it's just a revenue call of like how much we built it, it's functional. It's this much money. What's the margin on that? And how many can I produce quickly to get it out there? And that's really, I can see them not making a huge investment until they've seen a meeting like this. So this meeting like this sets kind of the standard of what the approach is from the Ethereum community, at least from the developer standpoint of what their tactical response is going to be. Right now, and I've seen the Coinbase response from it, you know, or the CoinDesk had said, oh, it looks like it's a no-go. Vitalik was like, no. His initial discussion about it has to do with, you know, it's not a huge existential threat. We shouldn't have to fork the network because of it. But then you could see some of the tone coming back from the rest of the other folks on the proverbial call. Were like, well, it's not that big of a change if we were to tweak the algorithm. And then that being said, we could include it with an existing hard fork. So bottom line, all these different projects, and it doesn't matter if it's us building an application, it has nothing to do with crypto, or it's crypto. All in the crypto world, it's all, if you have something that's not backwards compatible, it's considered a hard fork. If you have something that is compatible, it's a soft fork, which means that you put it out there and then any other clients that haven't upgraded will still work. most of the things such as like an algorithm change is going to be a hard fork, meaning it's going to invalidate other equipment that's not able to connect it to the network. So to make a hardware change, it's not just a matter of, or make an algorithm change, it's a pretty big decision. Even if it's easy technically to create and go test, it's like a decision point. Like somebody needs to make a decision like, hey, we're going to hard fork, and then a lot of people, pools, miners, everybody has to update things, right? So it's a cause and effect, right? So the folks that, like, an event has to occur. So you want to have some level of lead time for people. Tools, software needs to be updated. The miners have to be updated. And so the best thing to do on that kind of scenario is, and what was kind of left out in the end of the meeting, of what I got listening to it from an objective ear, is saying, and from his position is saying, I won't do Ethereum as a group will not bless a emergency hard fork, but if it can be proven out and checked in and validated on testnet, and not pull from their current EIP agenda plan, like somebody else can take on that task to say they're going to champion it from a code standpoint and check it in, and get it onto testnet and show, hey, this algorithm, here's the algorithm change, not that huge of a deal, and it would have a big deal against any ASICs, but that technically it's not that big of a deal. Then that can get pulled up into the next sets of meeting. There's a meeting in 2 weeks. So I'm kind of putting out there, if people are very motivated on this and you have the technical ability to contribute to this, then you can go out there and update that, the contribute code to making the change. There was a few algorithm suggestions out there, making some adjustments to eTash itself, or even going to SHA-3. I think SHA-3 would be, it's not heavy IO based, and that's a pretty substantial change, I would think. But you could see Vitalik's mind working, virtually listening to him, of like, well, you can make block headers faster if you're in SHA-3. It's not huge IO constraint. Like, if somebody takes on that action and actually commits it and lets the Ethereum other core developers look at it, what I'm saying is there's a pretty good chance they'll actually consider it on the next planned hard fork, which right now they're wishy-washy if they're going to do Byzantine or wait for Constantinople's release. But any of these are just hard points of release schedules. So bottom line, all that being summed up, I looked at the entire meeting as, yes, they're not going to make a contentious, heavy decision in this meeting, and I wasn't expecting that, and I know a lot of the community was expecting that, but I tweeted out 2 weeks ago, not as like a negative nanny on the situation, but understanding it from, and I put like the architect hat on, my primary role type of hat on there, and look at it running a large project standpoint. You're not going to have that kind of decision being made in the meeting today, but the best you can hope for is exactly, I think, what happened is, one, a discussion around it, to start talking about different options, talk about the externalities of it, of like who's working on what, can we allocate people to it, will it delay anything else we're working on, can somebody else help with it, and all of those things were set up. So I look at it as a positive thing, that the way they talked about it, and that if people are very passionate about it and want to maintain that and have the codability to check in an algorithm change to it, then go out there, make a carbon vote. You can Google carbon vote for the EIP or for Ethereum, and actually create a voting system that people can digitally sign to show the authenticity behind it, to show, hey, I'm for this or not against it. You can go out there, create that, and then or just submit a code change into the branch under that EIP to say, hey, here's the change, guys. It's not that big of a deal. Can we pull this into Rasmussen or one of the other test nets and just test it? And then when they're going through the adjudication of what's going to be in the next hard fork, it can be included. Because I think it's going to go as simple as that kind of decision point. Thanks for those biddies, Astro. That we do appreciate that, buddy. It's that simple of a decision. Yes, it might be work that you have to do up front, and it may not get included. That's a reality. That's a reality in anything, right? But if it's important enough to enough of the community, it will get done, at least in a creation of an algorithm or an update to an algorithm that should be ASIC resistant, and it will at least, you know, show the community that, hey, we are going to keep this ASIC resistance, and that the poison pill isn't necessarily proof of stake because we don't know that timeline. And the one part that I'll make mention in this that concerned me, it concerned me a little bit because I figure once they go offline, they'll still hash it out and talk to it because that's just the way team stuff works. This part was very visible. Us as like product owners would be able to see what's going on, a product, you know, users and all that kind of stuff. Like we saw that 2-hour meeting or an 1.5-hour meeting, and then when they go offline, they can talk through the other issues and the idiosyncrasies of it. But one of the things that concerned me was the approach of like, well, you know, if it's an existential threat to the network, being a 51% attack, or if Bitmain gets too much control and it seems like they're being bad players, we'll just speed up this other release. That, in my opinion, and Hudson, if you're listening, or any of the Ethereum folks, and Vitalik, if you sneak into this thing and you're just sitting quiet, that's fine. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. Don't rush something as powerful as moving the entire algorithm over to proof of stake. Because you have an existential threat. You take the least line of resistance, you fork the algorithm. If you have to do an emergency hard fork, you have a planned thing. If you even think that that's an issue, you should absolutely fork the system, right? You should take that opportunity to where you're not a contentious situation with another centralized player, and we're going to have, like, you know, a much more bloodier situation to where it's pretty simple. Monero went out and said, hey, we're forking. You can create other chains or whatever you want to do, but we're going to do this for the sanctity of the community, and we're going to stay to what we said. And it happened last night, and it's functional, and we saw almost a 70% drop in total network hash power for all of Monero worldwide across all the different pools. So a 70% is pretty much. I would not read in a full into that because a lot of people could have not updated their miners. People didn't know that there was updates to miners. I mean, I just released the multi-miner last night pretty late. For the people that were using our multi-miner that has those updates for you can use on the Monero fork. So you should see a ramp back up to, and if you start to see that ramp, it isn't that, you know, somebody went and fixed and retaped out a new ASIC. It literally is people just updating their miners. So we'll get, I would say, after at least a 2-week period where people are like, oh crap, I'm not getting paid anymore. What's going on in Monero's land? My rigs were just running in the background. You'll get that kind of, look at it from a payment cycle standpoint. So people that are not being aware are going to eventually switch over to the miner that works, right? If they have a GPU rig, you should get a better, clear design of what's going on the network. In addition to the organic growth that's going to happen from people seeing that the hash rates came down a lot and the price didn't really do much, the profitability goes up because the difficulty is going to go down after the difficulty retargets because there's not a lot of people on the network. So you're going to see this weird artificial thing go down where it's probably going to do a seesaw for a second because people are going to come over to that network. If you've been mining Raven, if you've been mining stuff with your XMR, other coins and stuff that are kryptonite based, you may go back over to Monero. You're going to have this weird organic shift. Naturally, you should have that. So we should see it after a couple weeks where the network shakes out, and then we can do a real post assessment of what was the net effect of ASICs on the network. That, mind you, I don't think have shipped yet. So that means a lot of people are out there, and I'm not going to get in and say I'm trying to stay neutral from a business standpoint with Bitmain. A lot of people are anti-Bitmain. I look at it, they're a company and they're taking advantage of a lot of situations because they have a technical advantage over people and can tape out things real quick. Understand that there's probably other entities out there, just because we're talking about just the raw creation of value and money that can be exchanged for fiat currency. There's no question about that. That there's probably other entities out there that have taped out their own ASICs that don't go sell them to communities. If you have enough investors that can come together and can upload, give cash to somebody to go the Global Foundries or Samsung or somebody and say, hey, I got this design, I need you to go build it. And then they have their own little mining farm. They took a big risk of making their own ASICs and they do it in the background, and we don't see that, right? So it's not all necessarily all about Bitmain. It's also Bitfury. It could be all these other companies that we don't even know about that are taping things out themselves and have taken that that risk of going against an algorithm, you know, with their own proprietary equipment that now are also affected. Now, I'm not going to boo-hoo them. They were kind of do it in the background under their own pretenses, and that's a business plan, right? Whatever. But they took the risk that a community could fork the coin too. So it kind of runs both ways. So in general, and in closing of the Ethereum thing, if you guys don't know that they do bi-weekly live streams, Ethereum Foundation on YouTube has that. They post these agendas that I had just right here up, which kind of shows you the, here, let me zoom in a little bit for folks that can't see. You can contribute yourself to these, offering comments. I would say try to keep it civil, guys. I mean, I understand that everybody on the internet's a troll at some point in their life and will get triggered and all that kind of stuff. But like, this is like some at least pretty important stuff to a lot of people. So if you have something, it's kind of one of the old sayings, you know, if you have something good to say, go out there. Even if you have something kind of negative, at least be respectful for people. Go out there and just say, hey, here's my position on it. That's fine. But this is essentially, you can upvote, you can talk about the differences. People have been posting different algorithm options there with like X16R. But, you know, let your voice be heard on there if you have a big, you know, point to wanting to, you know, you're trying to get across here. Or if you have an ability to contribute and spend a few cycles and see what's out there to contribute with. So I'm just trying to make sure that you guys have an awareness of that and then kind of give you guys a recap of where that was at. So my perspective, I usually go half full on most stuff anyways, because I look at both sides of it and I look, okay, what's the negative context? I think the conversation started kind of negative because it was like, no, we're not going to do that. But it was in the context that we were going to do an emergency hard fork, which isn't going to happen. So if the community bands together, does the testing, and then can have it as part of the next viable known hard fork, I think there's an opportunity there, and that's what should be focused on right now. I'll open it up for questions with that. Hopefully I answered most of those things out there. I think everybody has kind of the marching orders on it if you are a contributor to it. I'm just making sure I didn't have any other Valtalic there. Tweets. Let's see here. Any questions coming through? I can't really, if you can read them, Chris, are you looking at their... Yeah.
What about risk of money type deals, extortion to not fork and benefit of ASICs?
I mean, that's business ethics 101. I mean, I would think that anybody that's into this space, so that's one thing about having a collaborative situation. There's probably 20 people on that call. And if you have a few people that are, you know, are against it and they're being paid to say, you know, talk against it, I mean, they're going to have a pretty compelling argument of why. And I think in general, there is no argument on the ASIC side short of, you know, it's a free market and people can build whatever they want. Why would you do that to, you know, a business that invested money? It's no different than somebody going out and buying a graphics card. I mean, I think that's the strongest argument you can make on somebody that makes an ASIC. There's a lot of other counter arguments. One of them being, the one I always go back to them is saying, you know, it's a closed source situation, and there's already documented discussions that have been done on the Bitcoin side where there's kill switches on the Bitmain S9s, right? So I mean, like, do you want to buy something that somebody else can control this whole time? Like my GPUs, I plug in, I can repoint where I want. NVIDIA's not going to go and nuke them, right? So, you know, there's a lot of centralization risk and issues with ASICs. You know, I mean, it's a competitive environment, but you know, you're giving a lot of control over to somebody like Bitmain that, like, if something happens and a kill switch is sent or somebody goes and trolls the network or hacks the network and it's not even Bitmain's fault and then goes and nukes your ASIC, I mean, there's a lot of risk there, not just for the fact that if they coordinated and try to attack the network, that I think you could offer as counterpoints.
Do you think it's really an ASIC or a bunch of GPU hardware making it go fast?
So it's nobody will know until somebody gets a hand on and can reverse engineer what's going on with the E3 in general. There's been a lot of speculative different numbers coming out. I mean, somebody was saying the F3 does 1.5 gigahash at like 900 watts, which theoretically right now with given hardware out there is highly improbable unless they have some kind of new way of handling the DAG. It's probably very optimized, a very optimized ASIC to do a very specific task, mixed with a good memory controller and a specific way of handling the memory. I've seen DDR3. It doesn't make sense that it would be DDR3 memory. 32 gigs also doesn't make sense because, I mean, it's not about the size, it's about the speed and access and timing of the memory. So the size is really kind of irrelevant and short of just the DAG growth. And I mean, 32 gig, where are they thinking that these things are going to run for an eternity? So I would say nobody can really answer that question effectively until we actually can get and see what it's made of, right? But that being said, the only other alternative it could be is an FPGA that's reprogrammable. That would be one of the risks of switching the algorithm, because then they could go and do a software push to it and reprogram the chip. So like if they switched over to SHA-3 and they said, oh yeah, no problem, bro, we got that. 2 weeks later they push it. And then now that's the other risk. So, I mean, I doubt it's an FPGA, because the FPGA and the memory controller side of that and a lot of memory onto an FPGA is super expensive. They'd be losing their butt right now if they were selling them for $800. So it looks like it's just, maybe a modify. I mean, if it would be a P106 or a P104 that's modified, a P104 is like $700 by itself, which is essentially a 1070 Ti. So it's more than likely an ASIC that has a proper memory controller on it and some adjustments on the way the memory is handled. And I don't know how much they spent in R&D, who knows, but $800 seems like they were taking a risk that this fork was going to happen and they're just trying to dump them.
Will you be buying an ASIC to test?
So I have access. So I have a few people that have actually purchased them that I know that will probably actually get hands-on one whenever it comes in. Regardless if Ethereum forks or not, we'll take a look at one. I'm personally not buying one though. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm leaving it on that EIP. So that was the EIP. The other piece that I wanted to talk to today, if there's no more questions with the Ethereum piece there, just go out there if you have an ability, share, like, subscribe. Go out there and share this video after this is done. I'll have it on YouTube. Try to get some discussion around this. And let people understand, like, what this is the rolling, like, this is on us, right? This is on the people that care about this thing getting forked right now, is on how we organize as a group to say this is important to us. And as a community, we're going to contribute. We're going to do a carbon vote. We're going to go out there and do an update to the EIP with the code release, that kind of stuff. So it needs to be shared out there. It isn't about finger pointing. It isn't about hating on Bitmain. It ain't about all that, right? It's about action now. What I heard on there in that meeting was action. I heard, hey, we have an opportunity of when we would include this potentially if it's available. So the next action is make it available and make it on a test net, and understand that if it's SHA-3, then there's multiple implementations. Give people options. People love options. It's about an analysis, an AOA, an analysis of alternatives. So if you create several alternatives out there and check that code in there and give the core developers a chance to look at it, it's just a decision point if they want to include it as part of the next EIP or the next release plan on the fork that's coming out. And right now they're making decisions if they're going to even have the next Byzantine release, because they have a few things that they've been working on. They're like, oh, we're going to have this release. So you got to make it compelling. So I'm trying to get the message out. I need your guys' support and the other channels that are out there doing it.